based on their latest game console, the Sega Dreamcast. Unlike most hardware platforms in the arcade industry, Naomi would become widely licensed for use by other game manufacturers and one of the longest running arcade platforms ever. This new engine would be utilized for the next game in Capcom's Versus series. In 2000, Capcom released their fourth installment in the Versus series with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, New Age of Heroes. With the Naomi engine, the game would feature 2D character sprites with 3D seen in the backgrounds and various other effects. In order to bring in new players, Capcom simplified the fighting engine to make the game more accessible to casual players. The Super Combo gauge was increased to 5 levels instead of 3, which allowed for players to link Super Combo moves together between characters. The air combo system was changed as well as the game's control scheme. The former 6-button configuration was changed to 4 main buttons and 2 assist buttons. Also, the series 2-on-2 tag team feature was increased to 3-on-3 teams. The game features all the main characters from the previous Marvel fighting games and the Versus series, along with additions from both companies. The Marvel side was joined by Cable, Colossus, Iceman, Iron Man, Doctor Doom, Marrow, Psylocke, Sentinel, Silver Samurai, Spiral, Thanos, and an additional Wolverine with a regular bone structure instead of the adamantium claws. The Capcom side added Anakaris, Baby Bonnyhood, and Felicia from Darkstalkers, Guile from Street Fighter Alpha 3, Hayato from Star Gladiator, Jill Valentine from Resident Evil, Tronbon and Servbot from Mega Man Legends. Capcom also created 3 new additional characters for the game. Amingo is a cactus-shaped, sombrero-wearing humanoid who could reshape his body into various plant forms. Sun is a monkey girl who is the granddaughter of a character with the same name from a Capcom arcade game in 1984. Ruby Heart, the lead character of the game, is a French pirate who summons the Marvel and Capcom characters together into a battle against a new evil. This new evil is known as the Beast, the final boss of the game. The Beast is a creature that threatens to bring the world back to primordial times by killing all life in the process and must be defeated by the player in its 3 different forms. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 became an instant hit when it arrived in arcades. Fans loved the game's massive 56-character roster that allowed for multiple possibilities and playstyles. With the high level of action possible on screen, the game was just as much fun to play as it was to watch. The simplified control scheme and easy-to-learn combos were great for casual players, and there was even depth to be found for the hardcore players. While the game was a feast for comic book and fighting game fans, there were still a few things people were displeased about. Some people found the action speed too fast-paced to easily keep up with, which made the game feel less methodical compared to prior Street Fighter games. With so many characters to choose from, the game was incredibly unbalanced. If a player had the right set of characters, they could easily defeat someone else, which made it possible for the game to feel really cheap at times. Also, the game's soundtrack wasn't exactly what people would expect from a typical fighting game. The music featured a strange sort of jazzy lounge music that people either loved for being out of place or hated to death for its happy, upbeat rhythms. Since Marvel vs. Capcom 2 ran on Sega's Naomi engine, the game was initially ported to the Dreamcast in 2000. The Japanese version of the game actually had an online feature which allowed players to battle against one another over a specialized network. They could also hook up their VMU to the arcade version of the game. This option enabled players to earn points that could be used to unlock characters, stages, and new costume colors. However, when the game arrived in other regions, these options were removed and players had to instead earn points by playing through the game multiple times. Still, they were given the option to trade points with other players by connecting 2 VMUs together. Ports of the game eventually came to the PlayStation 2 and Xbox in 2002 and 2003, but due to Capcom losing the Marvel license, the game saw a limited print run. With the high demand for the game and limited release, the prices for the game soon skyrocketed in stores and online. However, since the Dreamcast version was the most similar to the Naomi arcade hardware and had a higher number of copies available, it is considered the superior version of the 3. In April 2009, Marvel and Capcom announced that the game would be making a return to the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 as a downloadable game and feature online multiplayer. Other updates include widescreen support and an option for smoother or crisper character sprites. The game would be developed by Backbone Entertainment, the same team behind Super Turbo HD Remix, and use the same game code as the Dreamcast version. It is slated for a summer 2009 release. During the same production period as the Marvel vs. Capcom series, Capcom had also begun working on another series of fighting games that would pit their Street Fighter franchise against characters from their longtime rival SNK. Back in 1998, the Japanese magazine Arcadia did a cover spotlighting Street Fighter Alpha 3 and the King of Fighters 98, as they were both planned to release around the same time. The cover of the magazine, which read KOF vs. SF, was widely misread by many fans as an announcement of a single game featuring characters from Street Fighter and the King of Fighters. The following uproar from fans supposedly led to Capcom and SNK signing a deal in 1999 that would allow each company to produce 2 fighting games using both franchises. According to the deal, if one company produced a game, the company that distributed the game would receive all the profits and not the company that had licensed their characters for use. SNK was currently under financial strain after they started becoming underfinanced by their new owner, Aruz, a company best known for its pachinko machines. So SNK decided that for their first crossover fighting game, they would release it on their new Neo Geo Pocket handheld system. It would be developed by DIMS, a company founded by Street Fighter's original creators Takashi Nishiyama and Hiroshi Matsumoto. The game was titled SNK vs Capcom, The Match of the Millennium, and released in 1999. The game featured 26 characters from Street Fighter, Darkstalkers, The King of Fighters, and Samurai Showdown. Players could choose to fight in a one-on-one battle, tag team like Marvel vs Capcom, or a team battle like the King of Fighters series. They could choose between 3 different styles that would change how their super combos worked. Players could choose from a style similar to Street Fighter Alpha, and 2 modes similar to the one found in the King of Fighters 98. With its great controls, wealth of game styles and modes, SNK vs Capcom The Match of the Millennium is often regarded as the greatest handheld fighting game ever made. Unfortunately, with the success of the Game Boy Color, Nintendo's Pokemon, the anticipation of the Game Boy Advance, and SNK being purchased by Japanese pachinko manufacturer Aruse, the Neo Geo Pocket Color was eventually discontinued, so many people were never able to experience the game for themselves. A handful of collectible card games featuring SNK's and Capcom's properties soon followed but sold poorly. By the time Capcom released their first crossover fighting game from the deal, SNK had retreated from the American market and would also receive none of the profits that would come from it. The game would run on Sega's Naomi hardware and be titled Capcom vs SNK Millennium Fight 2000. The game featured team-based battles, used a 4-button control scheme similar to many SNK fighting games, and featured the groove system and ratio system. The groove system referred to the different attack meters that players could choose from. They could choose between the SNK groove based on the extra mode used in the King of Fighters games, and the Capcom groove based on the gameplay system for Street Fighter Alpha. The ratio system is used to divide the game's roster by each character's overall offense and defense, which ranged from 1 to 4. Players could choose to have 1 to 4 characters on their team as long as their combined ratio equaled or didn't go higher than 4. The game featured 33 characters primarily from Street Fighter and the King of Fighters, along with some from Darkstalkers and Samurai Showdown. On the Capcom side was Blanka, Dhalsim, Cammy, Sakura, Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Guile, Zangief, E Honda, Balrog, Vega, Sagat, M. Bison, Evil Ryu, Akuma, and Morrigan. On the SNK side there was Benny Morrow, King, Vice, Yuri Sakazaki, Kyo Kusanagi, Yori Yagami, Mai Shiranui, Terry Bogard, Raiden, Kim Kaplan, Ryo Sakazaki, Ryuji Yamazaki, Rugal Bernstein, Geese Howard, Orochi Iori, and Nakoruru. The game was only ported to the Dreamcast in 2000 but soon received another update. Capcom vs SNK Pro added Dan Hibiki and Joe Higashi to the game's roster, new moves for existing characters, new game modes, and unlocked everything by default. This version of the game was ported to the Dreamcast in Japan and the PlayStation in 2001, but by then Capcom would soon release a true sequel to the crossover fighting game. The game would be titled Capcom vs SNK 2 Millionaire Fighting 2001 in Japan, and would be changed to Mark of the Millennium 2001 in other regions. Capcom vs SNK 2 brought in more characters as well as many changes to the fighting system. Characters no longer had a specific ratio level, so the player can now select the characters and customize their ratio values. The 6-button control scheme returned along with 6 different grooves to choose from. These 6 grooves would determine both the character's super combo gauge and special techniques available to them. Each groove is designated with a letter and originated from Capcom's and SNK's other fighting games. C groove is based on Street Fighter Alpha 3, A groove is based on Street Fighter Alpha 3's V-ism, T groove is based on Street Fighter 3, S groove is based on the King of Fighters 94, N groove is based on the King of Fighters 98, and K groove is based on a combination of Samurai Showdown and Garou Mark of the Wolves. The game's roster increased to 46 characters and expanded to include characters from more of Capcom's and SNK's fighting games. The Capcom side added Eagle, Yoon, Rolento, Maki, and Kyosuke from rival schools. The SNK side added Rock Howard, Ryuhaku Todo, Chang Kohan, Haomaru, Hibiki Takane, and Athena. Depending on which characters the player selected, the final boss would be either Shin Akuma or Ultimate Rugal. Capcom vs SNK 2 is widely considered to be one of the most in-depth 2D fighting games of all time. Along with the massive selection of characters from 2 of the biggest fighting game companies, the Groove system offered multiple playing styles for each character. The combination of numerous fighting game franchises into one collective fighting game was a dream come true for longtime fighting game fans. Many of the people who were turned off by Marvel vs Capcom 2's fast-paced action enjoyed and preferred Capcom vs SNK 2's more technique-driven game mechanics. SNK fans also got to see many of their favorite characters redrawn with new character sprites. However, it was more of a mixed reaction when it came to Capcom's characters. Instead of redrawing all of its characters, Capcom decided to only redraw the more recent characters while reinserting old character sprites from previous games for others. This made some of the characters appear washed out and lacking in detail due to their lower resolution. The game was first ported to the Dreamcast and PlayStation 2 shortly after its arcade release and added Evil Ryu and Orochi Iori to the roster, as well as the option to customize up to 2 groove systems. In 2002, the game was ported to the GameCube entitled Capcom vs SNK 2 EO. It retained all the features included in previous ports, removed the roll cancel glitch, and added the EO system. The EO system, which stood for Easy Operation, allowed the players to perform special attacks using the right analog stick. The port suffered from terrible controls due to the GameCube controller. In 2003, Capcom vs SNK 2 was ported again to the Xbox and became one of the first fighting games to include online play over Xbox Live.